Welcome to Shovel Talk, a podcast for economic developers. From your friends at the Golden Shovel Agency.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bethany Quinn, and I am the Vice President of Strategy and Content Development for Golden Shovel.
And I'm Amanda Jenkins, Gatekeeper Client Manager for Golden Shovel.
And we want to welcome you to our podcast series called Shovel Talk. On this series, we are profiling the economic developers that make our communities incredible places to live. These are very passionate people, but it's hard to see what really goes on behind the scenes in the economic development world. On our podcast, we're going to be profiling them to understand who they are, where they come from, and why they are motivated to make their communities a better place.
Today on Shovel Talk, we'll be interviewing Horton Hobbs from the Springfield Chamber. Join us as we explore his interesting childhood, find out how meteor showers paved the way for this economic developer, and stick around for the end because you'll want to hear all about the Horton Hobbs family band.
We are here with Horton Hobbs. Horton is the Vice President of Economic Development at the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce in Springfield, Ohio. Horton, would you like to say hello?
Hello, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining Amanda and I today.
My pleasure.
We would like to know a little more about Horton Hobbs, starting with, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Well, I'm from Springfield, Ohio. That's where I grew up. I can't say I was born here. I was actually born in Newport News, Virginia, but moved here when I was 6 months old because of Wittenberg University. And I've been here my whole life, even went to obviously grade school, middle school, high school, left for a little bit to go to college up in Michigan, but then came back to Wittenberg. And so I even went to college here in Springfield as well. And then got my graduate degree at Miami University and then promptly moved right back home to Springfield.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit about your family background and your experience being able to see kind of behind the scenes at the Smithsonian.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't talk about this a whole lot because I just don't. It's not normally who I am. But yeah, I had a very cool childhood. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was the curator of the Smithsonian, so curator of zoology at the Smithsonian. So his focus was in crayfish, so invertebrate zoology. He and my father have introduced or named the vast majority of crayfish species, certainly in North America, but if not actually probably much of the world, frankly. And so it was very cool. As a kid, I would go to Falls Church, Virginia, where they lived, about an hour outside of DC. And my dad would spend much of the summers doing research with my grandfather. And I would spend time when I wasn't at their home, I would go in with dad and hang out at the Smithsonian. I remember one time as a kid getting a behind the scenes look at the Tyrannosaurus Rex display that they were putting out. And I got a chance, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this publicly or not, but I actually got to touch the Hope Diamond. It was really, really cool.
Wow,
when they had it out
cool.
cleaning it. Yeah, it was very awesome. Just a neat perspective. And I got a chance to go back there a couple of years ago on an economic development trip, actually. And I think I had my gut punched a little bit. So I got to actually talk to a group of people that were in the same wing my grandfather's office was. And they've since, his office doesn't exist anymore. There is a picture of him in one of the rooms, but nobody there remembered him. That's how long ago. So
That's awesome. That must have been a real nostalgic trip for you.
it was awesome.
So when you were a kid, you were obviously surrounded by scientists. Mm-hmm. Were you a science guy as a kid, or were you out there playing with superheroes and getting dirty?
Yeah, I was getting dirty. We lived in a cul-de-sac in Springfield, and in the back of the cul-de-sac was a set of woods. So I grew up, really in the height of the 80s, and, Star Wars was my favorite thing as a kid. And I remember when Return of the Jedi came out, and the Ewoks and all the land speeders and all that stuff in the forest, we would play Star Wars in the woods behind our house. And I mean, my buddies who lived a couple streets down, it was the same woods, and it was connected from my house to theirs. And so, I mean, we had we had villages and, our own make-believe stuff. And yeah, it was cool. But I was also a science guy too. So, I would travel a lot with my dad in the summers because that's when he did his research. My mom and my sister would stay back home because she was in sports. And I was just 7 years younger than her, so I wasn't quite there yet. And so I got to do the science thing. But man, I can't even, I tell my kids a lot, I don't even know how they are growing up the way they are. We didn't have phones, anything like that. We got dirty, banged our faces against trees and everything else, and had fun doing it. I can't imagine what it would have been like with cell phones.
So tell us about your favorite research trip that you took with your dad as a kid.
Oh my gosh. It was probably a little bit less research and more for me anyway. I'm sure there was research that was done. So a lot of the work he did, I remember us going out west a lot. And so we actually spent two trips where we went to the Grand Canyon, and that's not the purpose of the trip, but we were in that vicinity. But that same trip, two really cool things happened. I think this is why I love kind of Mid-America. I'm on the board of Mid-America, EDC, and certainly where I've met a lot of the Golden Shovel folks. And what I love about it is I have some shared experiences. So we were in the Badlands, my dad and I, and I'll never forget it. I can't remember how old I was. I do forget that, but I was still a young kid, probably 7 or 8 years old. And I remember we got out there, and it was a late afternoon, and we went to the ranger station, and Dad wanted to do an overnight permit. So we were going to go out to an area and just spend the night out in the Badlands, and then the next morning get up and trek around and then come back to the car. And I'll never forget the ranger. I was this starry-eyed little kid looking up at my dad, watching him like talk to the ranger. I thought he was the coolest thing, and I thought the ranger was cool too. And my dad's like, "Yeah, we like a day, an evening pass." And he said, "You're not going to believe it. Did you plan tonight?" And Dad's like, "Well, I mean, yeah, we planned to come here." "No, but you know what tonight is." And I remember my dad saying, "Well, no, I don't." And he goes, "Well, tonight's the night of a Perseid meteor shower." And I'm like,
Cool.
I'm tugging on Pop. I'm like, "What the heck is a Perseid?" He's, "I'll tell you in a minute." So nonetheless, we end up getting our packs on, and we walk out, and we go out onto this butte. And we built this cairn kind of out in the middle of where we were staying. And it was starting to get dusk, and you could actually, honest to goodness, hear the coyotes kind of in the background. And I said, "Pop, what is a Perseid meteor shower?" He said, "Well, it's a meteor shower that happens once a year." I think is what he said, once a year. And actually where we are, there's no light pollution, so we should be able to see it. And I honestly, I'll never forget, it was nonsense. We didn't sleep that night. The entire night we put our packs down, and we laid on top of them. You have to be careful because you have scorpions and that kind of stuff. But we laid out on top of them, and all night long we heard coyotes in the distance, and we watched meteor shower all night long. And then we left there, and we headed south, and we ended up at the Grand Canyon and went hiking at the Grand Canyon. So it was a very memorable trip.
That sounds spectacular. I don't think very many people would forget that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. It was awesome. Yeah, very lucky to have had parents that were very engaged in my life, and certainly gave me great opportunities, certainly.
Well, it's interesting because you did have so much fun with them as a child, yet you obviously decided to go in a very different career path. So, what was that moment when you were younger, looking at your career options that made you decide economic development?
Well, that's great. I don't think anybody ever goes into economic development or ever knows that that's what they're going into, for sure. I was actually a sophomore at Wittenberg University, and it was second semester. I had just come back after my first year up in Alma College in Michigan, and I came back to be a biology professor with my dad because I wanted to study with my father under my dad, do research with him like he had done with his dad. And that prior academic year, my grandfather, the one I mentioned before, had passed away. And that was the moment when I realized, wow, I got to be a scientist. I really got to do this. And I decided to go all in. Well, then I was doing great. And then there was this class called organic chemistry. I think if anybody on here has a science background at all, they'll know exactly what organic chemistry is. For some, that's kind of the weed out class. Well, for me, the intention wasn't not for it to be a weed out, but it was certainly, at the time I tried. I had a tutor. I was struggling, and I decided I didn't want to mess up my GPA that I had already screwed up the first semester of college any worse. So I decided to withdraw from the class, and with the intent to come back the next school year, my junior year, and take the organic chemistry class. And so I de-enrolled and ended up picking up this just general geography class. And the professor, his name was Leonard Brown, and he looked like Santa Claus. And I'll never forget watching him. He was mesmerizing. I don't even really remember all the content of the class, other than this guy had such a passion for people. For him, it was the people of Honduras, where he would spend his summers, he and his wife, helping build villages. Who knew? And I just kind of got mesmerized with geography. And then I took another class, and I actually was taking a dual path to be a bio major and a geography major together, and ended up taking a class in GIS, Geographic Information System, which today is ubiquitous in every field. But then at that time, it was not in the mainstream. In fact, Wittenberg University, I was in a class where Ohio State University is about 45 minutes away, and my major professor was a geography professor there. Her husband was a professor there, and he got the very first commercial license or education license for GIS to be used at Ohio State University. Nobody else had that. And because his wife was my professor, she got it. So actually was in the first set of classes to ever use GIS technology. And I thought that's what I would do the rest of my life. And I did. I remember having the conversation with my dad, and I said, Pop, I'm going to finish this biology thing, but I don't think that's what I want to do for a living. And he said to me, you know what? All I've ever wanted and all your mother has ever wanted is for you to do something that makes you happy and something you're passionate about. If it's biology, great. If it's geography, great. But whatever it is, give it everything you got, and we'll fully support you. And that's kind of how it happened. There are a lot of nuances around that, certainly, but that was kind of the moment for me. And I tell that story a lot, and I'm glad I had that experience. It's a great thing about a liberal arts school. You can get away with that.
Yeah, it's great. It exposes you to so many different paths. It's pretty cool that you saw that technology as it first emerged, and you've successfully used that to attract businesses and create jobs for your community. Bringing that full circle is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there was a time there where I never thought I'd get back to using it again, and now I'm using it again. But the sad thing is, had I stayed in that field, which a couple of my classmates did, I'd have retired about 10 years ago. Literally at 35, I probably would have retired, because we would have been on the cutting edge of that technology. But hey, you know what? I'm happier for where life has taken me. So we're all good.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about where your career path has taken you. How did you end up at Springfield Chamber?
That's interesting. So I ended up going to grad school right out of college. And while I was at Wittenberg, I interned with our city of Springfield, which is our main city here. And I knew in that internship experience in the planning department that I either wanted to become a city planner or a city manager. Didn't even know really what economic development was, certainly at that point in time. And so I ended up going to Miami University, got my graduate degree in geography, but you have to specialize in something, and mine was in urban and regional land use planning. My first job, while I was still finishing my master's degree, was a firm called the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission in downtown Dayton, Ohio. It's a transportation planning firm, if you will. It's a public entity and does transportation planning for 3 counties, but at that time, land use planning for 5 counties total. And so I was doing land use planning, and I was in the most rural parts of our region, literally meeting with farmers literally on the back of their tractors at 7, 8 o'clock at night, because it was the only time you could talk to them about planning or land use in their townships and those kinds of things. And I really got a bug for it. But I always knew that I wanted to get back to Springfield, back to Clark County. We were living there, but I was working in Dayton. And I've been very lucky in my life not to have been let go, knock on wood, let go, or having to look for another job. Opportunities have presented themselves, and I've been very fortunate to be able to kind of pick and choose among those, and I don't take that for granted. But while I was there was an opportunity with a little town in Clark County, the only other city in Clark County, which is called New Carlisle. And if people from Clark County actually listen to this podcast, they'll probably cringe a little bit. But I knew what I was kind of getting into. It's a small town, great community, love the little city, but it's a tough town. And growing up here, you knew it was tough. It was kind of them against the rest of the world kind of mentality. And so I took that job and was there for a couple of years and really liked it. But while I was there, I had an opportunity to run the downtown Springfield redevelopment group called, at the time, Center City Association. Here I was, at that time, like a 28, 29-year-old snot-nosed kid, thought I knew it all and realized I didn't know a whole lot. But I took that GIS experience and that planning experience and was at our downtown organization at the time, looking back now, almost 20 years ago now, literally, at a time when our downtown was transforming or beginning to transform, and where planning was really important. And so I was there at a time when we did a kind of a comprehensive plan around some amenities around downtown, and we had 2 hospitals that were merging at the time, and the decisions were being made of where it was going to be located, outside of the city or staying in downtown. And I ended up staying in downtown. It ended up staying in downtown, and it's been very, very important in terms of the development of not just our community, but my career. But I'll tell you, there are times, and I hope there are listeners on here that reflect about their own career and looking back. And at that time, I was late 20s. I had 2 kids. Well, I had one and one on the way. And I would go out to dinner with my wife or with family, and I couldn't just have a meal by ourselves. People would come up and say, "What's going on downtown?" or "Why is that happening? I don't like what you're doing." It was those kinds of things. And I was a little over my skis, quite honestly. And I didn't know it then, but I knew I was uncomfortable. I felt was beginning to be pushed and challenged in a way that I just didn't like, frankly. Now I relish it, but back then I didn't like it. And so I was working closely with our community foundation at the time, and I knew the executive director fairly well. They had funded some of the work we were doing at Center City. And again, she kind of comes up to me and asked me to go to lunch, and I go to lunch. And while at lunch, the executive director now, but then was the CFO, hands me an envelope, slides it across the table, and says, "We would like for you to consider a position at the foundation." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, what is it?" "Well, it's our director of development." And I'm thinking, wow, economic development, that's kind of cool. Foundation, that's even cooler. This is a true story. So I waited about a week, and they called and they said, "Well, have you given any thought to it?" And I said, well, I'll at least go through the interview. This is a fact. I actually was so naive and wanted so much to kind of get out of my own situation that the interview went well, and I ended up kind of understanding what the role of the job would be, but I had no idea that when they said development, it meant fundraising. And so director of development was fundraising, not economic development. And I honestly thought that I was going to be able to do economic development and leverage the funding of the organization to do it. Needless to say, I was a little uncomfortable for the next year or so, but I ended up staying there 6 years and loved every minute of the last 5 of those years. And frankly, developed friendships and relationships with people who honestly, all they cared about was giving away their money, frankly, to make our community better. And it was so awesome, unbelievable. And so I probably would be there the rest of my life, and it was kind of a dilemma for me because I didn't want to lose I felt like I had given up on my education. I felt like I'd thrown away my master's degree. I'd thrown away all this other stuff. But what I also realized was, gosh, it's okay. Because if you love what you're doing, it really doesn't matter the path you take to get there. Life is too darn short, and you gotta just do what makes you feel good. And I was standing in line at Rotary back in 2011, probably end of September 2011. And I'm standing in the buffet line, which is, you think about those today in COVID, we'll probably never have buffet lines again, but I was standing in the buffet line, and one of my former board members, who's my boss now, Mike McDormand, was standing there. He's like, "Hey, Horton, how are you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm great." He goes, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something. Can you come over to my office this afternoon?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Here I am, happy-go-lucky." And I knew that his economic development guy, who had done incredible work here at the chamber for the 3 or 4 years he was there, was moving on, and Mike was looking for somebody, but I wasn't really interested in getting back in the game. I remember Mike talking to me about 5 years prior to that, so like 2008 timeframe, he had reached out to me about kind of if they brought downtown development under the auspices of our chamber, would I be interested in coming over? And I kind of thought, yeah, maybe, but who knows? So anyway, after lunch, I end up going to his office, and for the next 2 hours we talk, and he basically offers me this job, the job that I have now. And he would tell you if he was sitting on this call with us, he had to call me. And if you guys, Mike is not a guy who waits 3 weeks for anybody to do anything. He's on you right now. Well, he gave me 3 weeks, and he called me and goes, "Hey, have you decided?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "The position." I said, "Are you really serious about that?" And so over the course of the next couple of days, we ironed it out, and I ended up leaving the foundation to a huge celebration by the board and the staff and a lot of community people to come over and do this work at the chamber. And I've now, coming up this January, will have been here 9 years. It's very hard to believe. And again, the first 2 years, I had no clue what economic development was. It wasn't the same economic development I had done in downtown work, for sure. But I'll tell you what, looking back, my life has changed so positively because of this experience. I mean, the people that I've gotten to meet across the world, certainly folks like you at Golden Shovel and GIS Planning and so many others that have really profoundly impacted and changed the way we do business here in our community has been spectacular. But more than that, the family I work with, and I mean it, family that I work with, I'm blessed to get up every day and not go to a job, but to do something that I love in a place that's my home. I hope sincerely that those listening, whatever it is that they pursue or end up pursuing, they do it with the same kind of passion that I've been so thankful to have been able to pour into this job. And again, it's not a job, it's a calling, it's a passion. And hey, by the way, the biology stuff, that's pretty relevant in economic development. The fundraising stuff, yeah, that works out pretty well too when you're trying to fund your organization. And it just goes to show that life takes you on all kinds of paths, as we all know in this particular year. But don't get pigeonholed into the path you're on, and don't look negatively toward it, because you just never know where it's going to take you. And boy, had I stopped because it wasn't panning out the way I thought, I would have missed this opportunity today that we're having right now. Obviously, it's not hard to talk about something you love.
Definitely, that's great advice for our listeners.
It's interesting because, like you mentioned, you are very passionate about what you do and you love what you do. And I think that that's the goal that most young people have when they're looking at going into their career. But really, what advice could you give someone who's looking to go into economic development specifically? And I ask that because even your own journey didn't necessarily take the most obvious of routes.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bethany. I think for me, it's don't expect. What I see a lot of, especially young folks that are coming out of college or just entering the workforce, and I really don't mean this as a stereotypical statement, but there's a lot of expectation that things are just going to get given to you, or because you have a certain role, there's an expectation that you're around a table, or that you've been anointed something. The advice I got when I was at Center City, so here I am 20 years ago, from one of our community leaders, God rest his soul, Mr. Richard L. Kuss. He actually, his dad, you may have heard of Speedway gas stations. That's located in Springfield, at least for the time being. That was founded here. His father-in-law was the one that founded Bonded Oil, which ended up being Emerald and then later Speedway. Well, he goes on to be one of the biggest names in our community, certainly, but also the most revered leader we probably ever had in our community. And we had lunch several times, but I remember him saying to me, "Horton, you need to go through life with your eyes wide open, and you must always seek the guidance of those who have come before you. Never expect something to be handed to you, and that if you take that approach, you will have earned your right to be a leader in this community when the time is right. But don't ever underestimate your role as a leader, because just because you may not be seated at the head of the table doesn't mean that your contributions aren't important to making the community better. And so you have to earn that place to be called a leader. But if you do things the right way, which he said, of course, I think you will, you'll have that opportunity. Leadership is not, you're born with the skills, but it's not given to you. You have to earn that place by the way you treat others and by the way you work in this community. And so, I've tried to instill that in our younger staff. I've tried to speak that into students when we talk to them in schools. Certainly the audience is different and you say it differently. But my biggest piece of advice, especially in economic development, is, there are going to be some things you need to be an expert in, but you need to make sure that you do the job of understanding the ecosystem that you work in. Don't expect a city official or a county official, I work at a chamber, or a business to tell you those things. You need to do the research. You need to do the hard work to earn your place at that table. Just because you're an executive or a vice president or whatever title you have doesn't give you the right to be in the conversation. You have to earn that right. And it doesn't matter the color of your skin or your race or your gender. There are biases that go with that, certainly, and they're unfortunate. But all I can tell you is in my lifetime, hard work has compensated for my shortcomings, and I have a lot of them. And so that advice to me at a young age in my career was probably the most defining. And, I have to think about it a lot, actually, and I have to draw from that a lot. Just work hard. And it doesn't mean you have to work 23 of the 24 hours of the day. The older I've gotten, the wiser I've become in terms of my work. I work a far less harder, but a lot more smarter. So I guess the last piece of advice is don't push yourself. Don't beat yourself up for being young and starting out a career and not knowing everything. That's okay. That's where you have to rely on mentors and find people, seek them out, seek people out in this profession. This is the best profession I've ever been in terms of collegiality and work. Heck, I've accomplished some good things in my career, but I'm most proud of the relationships that I've built. And I'm offering today to anybody that ever just needs somebody to talk to or needs somebody's sage opinion about something, I'm happy to be there for them, because it took that for me in this career to get me to where I am. That's the advice I could give.
That's awesome. Thank you. On behalf of any student or young economic developer that's listening.
Definitely. And anyone out there who has somebody that might benefit from this advice looking into economic development, please share our podcast with them. That is amazing advice. Thank you. So tell us, what surprises you most about your community? If someone was going to either visit your community or even move there, what would they be most surprised about as they get to know your community?
It's probably at a lot of different levels. I think if somebody were to come here for the first time not knowing anything about our community, they would just be blown away with the amenities that we have for a town our size, and the fact that we're between Dayton and Columbus. We're perfectly suited. And this is not a pitch, but we are just perfectly suited to have the kind of that very small town feel. It's a great place to raise a family, but yet you can get away and get to those bigger markets really, really easily. So I think those are kind of the hidden gems. The other thing is, people would be surprised at the history of our community and the role it played, frankly, in the development of our country. In terms of, one of the patents for the Wright brothers was let right downtown, right by our office, as a matter of fact. So some of the patents for the first powered flight came right from Springfield, and the national roads stopped in our community for 10, almost 15 years, actually, when the federal government ran out of money. So everybody going west to reach prosperity stopped in Springfield, Ohio, and that's why we started the way we were. And then at one point in time, turn of the century, we were the second largest industrial city in the world, behind Nuremberg, Germany. And that was unfortunately because of the Chicago fire. That was the manufacturing prowess that this community had back in the day. And so I think as a community, we probably rested on those laurels a little too much, a little too long, but we've seen our way through that.
We obviously do want to touch a little bit on the Springfield Chamber itself. Sure. And what your focus is today. As we're talking to you, we are still dealing with COVID-19. I'm sure a lot of people are curious to see how an organization that does have a long-standing reputation and is very established, how you have been able to maybe pivot right now during COVID, and how has that impacted your guys' focus?
Yeah, it's great. Great question, Bethany. It's almost, I feel like these are softballs. And for those listening, I didn't know these questions were coming. So it's actually, we have really found, it's been really interesting because, We are a chamber of commerce, as you mentioned, but as a chamber, we have three entities. Obviously, the chamber is the main entity, but we have a Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is funded by travel and tourism. So you can imagine where the funding's gone for that. But we also have the economic development apparatus, which is the public-private partnership. So we get funding from the county and our city, but then we have private funding. And right before this pandemic, we were getting ready to launch a $4.1 million capital campaign to kind of fund the organization, or at least the economic and workforce development for the next 5 years. And so you can imagine what happens in March when you're just getting started with that and you have a global pandemic, how one might think that would affect you negatively. And, you know, for whatever reason, and I'd like to tell you we're that good, but we're not. I think we're more lucky sometimes than we're good, and I'll take it. We were able to pivot literally on March 16th, which was the day our state kind of shut down in Ohio. We pivoted to our first Zoom meeting. And we, as chambers of commerce as a whole, the whole industry is I think has been facing a paradigm change for years, due in large part because of this crazy thing we call a smartphone. That really changed the value proposition for many chambers, because the networking and the engagement that chambers have come to make their hay on have been replaced by social media and LinkedIn and Facebook and frankly the smartphone. So chambers have really had an identity crisis for years. I think that's where we found our greatest opportunity. I hate to say that with using a pandemic from an opportunistic perspective, but the reality is we used it as an opportunity to change the way we engage we called them members before, we call them investors moving forward, because we've done over 600 Zoom calls with our members, our investors, if you will, our business community,
Wow.
our citizens, the public, the private companies, all in 9 months' time. And most of those they were friend raising and information providing. They were not handouts. The value proposition that we have found ourselves in is the information broker of the community. And so being that neutral convener of the conversation, which we had been doing, frankly, for years, somewhat apologetically at times, because sometimes it felt like you were wrangling people into a meeting to talk about common issues. We used this platform, this video platform, as a way to really engage. So now we're engaging the C-suite of our businesses, where before, if we were lucky to get middle management or frontline folks at best to engage in our work, now we have the C-suite engaged in meaningful ways because it's easier and it's more effective for them. While at the same time, we decided to put ourselves out there and really talk about this four-prong approach to our strategy and the work we're doing around workforce and economic development and community building and training and amplifying the work of our partners. And we used this video format as a way to amplify that message and tell it in a different way that we have found to be very compelling. And frankly, during this time, we've raised just a little over $4 million of the $4.1 million that we set out to raise last fall. So all of that has been done during a pandemic, all of it. And I have to tell you, it takes partnership to do that. And it takes a real dedication by lots of partners to make that done. And this is not a plug. This is just a fact. Convergent Nonprofit Solutions, we challenge them to change their paradigm. They're face-to-face. Many of those fundraising groups are face-to-face only. They had never done this. And I said, we're going to do Zoom and we're going to figure it out and we're going to make it work. Because at the end of the day, people give to people, but more important, people give to people with causes. They really don't give to our organizations. We like to think they do. But I learned that a long time ago at the foundation, that people really give to people. And when I'm sitting in front of an investor or a potential investor to our organization, I'm being held accountable to what we're doing. And so is our staff, and so is our CEO when he talks about what we're working on. There's power in that. But you know what? Golden Shovel provided incredible support to us by helping us tell our story. So we have expand2024.com website that Golden Shovel really helped us think through and put together and launch to give us a format and a forum for us to tell our story. You got to have partners like that to get that done. And that was a call to my friend John Marshall and Aaron Brossois to talk about, hey, how do we do this in a different way? And they were so embracing of a different way of doing this, even though it was using simple technology like a website, but it was telling a story in a different and compelling way. And so, this has been, it's been the best time for an organization like ours because we've reinvented ourselves. This isn't for public knowledge, but hopefully not too many people from Springfield listen at least right away, depending on when this comes out. But at the first of the year, we're going to change the whole name of our organization to better reflect who we are as an organization in our community, more in that partnership vein. That wouldn't have happened without the feedback we got from Zoom and some of these real engagements that we've had over the last year. So if you're nervous about it, you don't know if you want to embrace it, just do it. It's the Nike term, just do it. What's the worst thing that could happen? Somebody falls asleep on the camera, maybe turns off their video and ignores you. That's okay, but at least they tuned in.
That's so true. And thank you for saying that, people do give to people. You are so right about that. And I know there's so many businesses and organizations right now that are looking at how they can humanize their brand and their business when they can't go out and actually be in front of people. And so that's a great comment.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, there's so much around remote work right now, and businesses, and organizations and companies looking at remote work, and there's a lot of science out there around, people's routines through the day, and, looking at how people structure their day for productivity and things like that. So I'm very curious kind of what your morning routine looks like. Is there anything that you do to kind of get ready for your day? What does that look like for you? What keeps you motivated through the day?
Honestly, my day hasn't changed at all anymore. We've been back at the office really since May, honestly. We have a small team, and so we're able to socially distance quite a bit. So what keeps me motivated is when I look out my window and I see an empty building, or I don't see enough foot traffic, or I see a small business that during this time has gone under, like a restaurant, for instance. And that motivates me to get up and continue to tell the story. And I'll be honest with you, if we didn't have the campaign during this time, this investment campaign, I don't know what it would have been like for me, because nobody wanted to see me in their business. Certainly my colleagues, nobody wanted to do that. And they were so busy. Most businesses have been so busy, they don't even really want to get on a call. And we talked about the success of Zoom, but there are still limitations to it. But the campaign, honestly, for me, it galvanized our team. It pushed our CEO to think differently. It pushed our entire senior staff, my colleagues. Amy and Kendra are doing great work. We had to think differently about the way we're engaging, and we hired Kendra during the pandemic to engage with schools. Think about that. She can't get into the schools, but that's what's kept me motivated. That's what's got me going, because literally every day, 2 to 3 times a day for 4 months, all I got to do was, for an hour at a time, talk about all the great things that we've accomplished, but all the great momentum we're building, and what the future could be if we all get in the same boat and row together. And that was incredibly invigorating, probably something I really needed in retrospect. So it hasn't been real hard to get up. The nice thing is, sometimes if I'm just not feeling it, I can do it from my kitchen, but or my basement or whatever. But the reality is, in this work, there's so much work to do all the time. If you're looking forward for your community, it's not hard to be motivated, frankly, about the opportunities, especially in a difficult time.
So we know that you're motivated by very good, reasons, obviously, for your community. But you're a karaoke guy, so COVID-19 got tough. You could just bust out the karaoke machine. And for anyone at Golden Shovel and our other clients who have watched your videos in the past, we want to know 2 things. 1, where did your love of karaoke come from? And what's your favorite song?
Wow. Okay. So I will tell you, my favorite song is The Dance by Garth Brooks. It is
good one.
Hands down. My very favorite. My very favorite one to perform seriously is Keeper of the Stars. I sang that to my wife at our wedding. Kind of cheesy moment. I get it. My love for karaoke actually started when I was a little kid. My first plastic fake guitar. I cannot play the guitar at all, but God rest Eddie Van Halen. He was my hero, my idol as a kid. I had this red and white guitar that I put, tape that you used to put on your fingers, like if you had a jammed finger or whatever, it was kind of thin. I put that all over my guitar to make it look like the really tricked out, painted looking guitar from Eddie Van Halen. And I would sing at the top of my lungs, anything Van Halen, and then Jukebox Hero, all those songs from the 80s. But I didn't realize that I loved karaoke until my wife and I got engaged to my wife, and we became members of our local Moose Lodge. And we would go down there on Fridays and Saturdays. We may or may not have been of legal age. And we would sing. I would sing, and I would drag her and her family, like her aunt and uncles there, and on Friday nights, and we would just do karaoke. And then when I left to go to grad school, we lived in Oxford, or West College Corner, Indiana, which is essentially Oxford, which is 45 minutes away from Springfield. No joke. We would drive home every Wednesday night and do karaoke at the Moose Lodge, and then drive back that night. And if it wasn't karaoke, we were doing line dancing, which we don't do anymore. And so I loved it. I've always loved it. And then when we moved into the house that we're in now, my kids are teenagers, and not that I wanted to be the cool dad. I think I just wanted to channel my inner rock star. I'm like, screw this. I'm creating my own get up. So I did. And there are cheap ways to do this. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars, but I bought the stage lighting and the fog machine and the sound system, and YouTube's really great for lyrics and that kind of stuff. And the rest is history. We just have a blast all the time in the basement, and we have our own concerts. I know it's cheesy and weird, but that's just who I am. I think your whole team can attest to that.
So there's a Hobbs family band, is what you're trying to say.
Well, there's no band, but there are some singers. We're not all that great, but we have a great time. A lot of memories. A lot of people save for college. Unfortunately, we put our money in our vacations and our home and our karaoke, that kind of stuff. My poor kids are going to have to figure it out.
Maybe they can sing for tips.
There you go. I love it.
So last question for you. Tell me what your WIG is. What is your wildly important goal this year?
Well, since it's at the end of the year, it's just frankly to get through the rest of the year healthy around me, my immediate family. And while that's crazy to say that's a goal, I think it actually has to be a goal now to make sure we're doing the right things. But, honestly, to enjoy this holiday season more than I've probably ever enjoyed it, to not let what typically becomes the stressors that make the holidays a crazy time become what they are. I always take them for granted. My goal this year is not to take them for granted. And I'll tell you why. I already put our Christmas tree up. Now it's not decorated, and I already put the lights on the house. And it wasn't until this morning, and I turned them on yesterday, much to the dismay of my family. I thought and usually to me too, I'm like, I'm Mr. Grinch until it's Thanksgiving at least. But the reality is the Weather Channel had something on this morning that psychologically it's good for the brain now, at least to turn on the holidays early this year. So my goal this year is to truly, truly take the holidays for what they mean to me and what I think they mean to me, and embrace this time, because I think it's easy to take it for granted most years. But in a year like 2020, it's really important to think about the importance of the time we're in. So that's a goal. Never would have been a goal before, I can promise you that.
Now I have one follow-up question. Do you do any Christmas songs for your, karaoke?
I don't know. I don't know. Gosh, I'm sure the eggnog will flow and there'll be something that we sing.
How about virtual karaoke with the whole Golden Shovel team on our Christmas happy hour?
I would love to do that. If YouTube doesn't shut us down, well, YouTube won't, but if it's on Zoom, we'll be okay. We can do it. But if it's on, okay, then I will be happy to. We'll arrange that, and I'll be happy to turn that on. And as long as it's Zoom, we won't get shut down.
Perfect.
All right, it'll make our party even more fun.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even have to drink to do it. That's what's interesting, right?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Horton, for your time today. We've really enjoyed learning more about Horton Hobbs and looking behind the curtain, so to speak, right?
Thank you so much, Bethany and Amanda and Darren, for the opportunity. It's an honor to be a client of Golden Shovel, and I appreciate the friendship, and thanks for the opportunity to tell my story.
And that concludes our inaugural episode of Shovel Talk. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Horton and you're able to take his advice to heart and find ways to implement that in your professional life. Check out our website and social media to find out who we'll be interviewing on the next Shovel Talk.